Welcome to The Good Pod. Every Sunday we delve into crucial Christian topics, led by Dr. Barry Napier. Don't miss out on our thought-provoking discussions. By the way, have you checked out our website? christiandoctrine.com. If you want to explore more about Bible theology ministries, start by diving into the articles under the ministry category. Our content is all about spreading the truth of Christian doctrine. We want everyone to see the incredible power of God's kingdom, just like it said in Mark 9:1. Join us as we uncover the depth and beauty of these teachings every week.
So, we come to the definitions of fornication and adultery. It seems that many Christians think these two forms of sin are totally separate and different, but they are not. The reason for highlighting this mistake is that some with a malicious heart try to damage fellow believers who have rightfully been divorced. And to see what I mean, please read my article A-346. In this podcast, we will simply look at the two words and the definitions as given by Scripture, not by fallible human beings with an axe to grind. There are two main meanings for the word adultery. One is that of following after false gods, when the adultery is against God. The better known meaning for adultery in the New Testament, however, is that it is a sin committed by a male and female, one or both being married, that mimics the marriage union. That is, two people ignore their marriage vows by going off with another person they are not married to, or meeting in secret. However, that is not the end of the definition. Really, there's no real difference in the two words. Fornication, again, in the New Testament is usually applied to single people who indulge in illicit sex, including adultery, homosexuality, bestiality, incest, and so on. In other words, any illicit sex, any sexual activity not within the marriage bond. However, even within the marriage bond, there can be illicit sexual behaviour, but this is not the subject I will deal with today. These can include such acts as the dangerous anal sex, role-playing where there's fantasy about another person, swapping partners, pornography. The list is almost endless. This term also covers sexual activity with a person who is divorced for no good reason, and dabbling with idolatrous activity. In other words, adultery is a subsection of fornication. Illicit sexual behaviour can be anything from what is considered to be normal, that is physically normal, to outrageous and wicked activity. For example, whilst using a prostitute is a sin, its sexual activity may be biologically normal, though the relationship is sin. On the other hand, bestiality and other similar activities are both sinful and abnormal. The same applies to homosexuality, both male and female. Many forms of this sin operate under the heading of deadly homosexuality, the latest being transgenderism. There is a difference between normal but sinful sexual behaviour and abnormal behaviour that is usually perverted. In all cases, the sexual activity is illicit. Claiming the usual excuse, how can something that feels so good possibly be sinful, is of no value whatever. If God calls it sin, then that is exactly what it is. And in the case of homosexuality, what same-sex couples claim, that it is just an alternative form of love, is a demonic abuse of the concept of love. It is really just plain lust for something forbidden. It cannot be love, because God created a man to be with a woman. In his eyes, there is no other acceptable sexual relationship. Now, adultery is usually applied to married people who leave their marriage bed in favour of another person who is also married, though it can also apply to idolatry. Or a single person has a sexual relationship in mind or act, even when it does not include full sex, with a married person. This is not the whole story, though. For a married man or woman may leave temporarily or permanently, openly or secretly. He or she might have sexual relations with another person of the opposite sex or the same sex, with animals and even dead people, one's own family members. The list is endless. But all of the activities are sinful, whether biologically normal or perverted, and all are illicit, no matter what a culture or a law says. Some married couples have sexual relations with others openly, such as those who indulge in something called swinging, whether in individual situations or in group orgies. The fact that they do so openly with each other's consent makes no difference, nor does having an open marriage, so-called, make any difference. It is all adultery and all illicit. The married spouse may also go off with a single person. This is still adultery, worthy of condemnation. Though both words, fornication and adultery, are used independently, both have essentially the same meanings, because fornication means illicit sex, as does adultery. Adultery is a sin because of fornication, which can be either physical or even mental. Many modern Christians have come to grief because they indulge in computer fantasy, entering pornographic websites to satisfy sexual lust. Though they have not physically met another person, their activities are nevertheless sinful. If they are married, they tend to watch this kind of image secretly. Whether or not their spouse discovers the secret is irrelevant, for they have still committed adultery. And if they are single, the sin remains and is usually referred to as fornication. But they are essentially the same thing because both are against God's plan for mankind. Fornication is where we get our word for pornography. The Greek word for fornication, as used in Scripture, includes the meaning of adultery, and as we have said, it covers every imaginable illicit sexual activity. For single people, fornication is any sexual activity that is both illicit and outside marriage. For married people, fornication is the same, and can exist even within the marriage itself, as I've shown earlier. I have had a number of emails, for example, from folks worldwide who ask me if anal sex with their wives is acceptable. I will not cover the activity in this podcast, but suffice to say it is sin and a gross abuse of the body, often leading to permanent physical injury. The reason men ask the question is that they have allowed their minds to roam into fantasy, a fantasy of the world, not of normal relationships. Sadly, there is also evidence that women too are turning to this evil act out of lust, despite the many health reasons not to. The summation is that fornication and adultery are essentially the same thing. Because both refer to illicit sex, it is essential that we all understand what true marital sex is and why certain acts, even within marriage, are wrong, if not dangerous. And some have deadly bad health side effects. We can enjoy marriage and not stray into areas of activity that God hates and which can send our Christian lives into a dark pit of despair. Do not follow modern people with millennia-old sins, and do not fantasize about doing what God hates and may even punish whilst we're on this earth. The rewards for a married couple who love each other and who do not wander off the narrow path are wondrous and legitimate. No true marriage looks elsewhere for so-called love. Instead, each spouse deepens their feelings for each other within their own relationships. Anything else ends a true marriage and places the offender on the wrong, wider path of destruction. Forget the films, the TV, books and magazine articles advocating adultery or fornication, promiscuity and so-called living together, which is merely institutionalized prostitution. It is all gross sin in God's eyes and will never be blessed. In a true marriage, one spouse always deems the other spouse as better and more worthy of love than themselves. So when both think this way, the marriage can only grow in strength and love. And for a single person waiting for a partner sent by God is also well worth the wait, for the one he sends will always be the right one, if the waiting one remains true to God.